그럼 지금부터 이번 심포지엄에서 특별하게 준비한 순서인데요.
We will now begin the session, the Korea-U.S. Young Scholars Panel discussion, specially organized for this symposium. Let me introduce Professor Kim Young-joon. He received his PhD in political science from Claremont Graduate University and is currently the professor of political science at Gyeongsang National University. And joining Dr. Kim is Dr. Mark Abdollahian, CEO of ACERTAS and a professor at Claremont Graduate University. He focuses on designing and delivering advanced big data and predictive analytics for senior decision makers worldwide. Dr. Kim has now joined us on stage. Please welcome him.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I'm Dr. Yongjun Kim, political science professor at Gyeongsang National University. In this session, we decided to proceed with we decided to speak English in this session, so I'll be speaking, and the whole session will be proceed with English. The topic for this session, what we are going to talk about this session is the Cold War between China and the United States over technology. For the last several years, two countries have experienced serious confrontation on many fronts. But among those many fronts of the confrontations, high technology front is the real battle has taken place because it is the fight that no one could afford to lose. Why? If I have to choose two features to characterize the world we are living now, I would choose digital and network. And these two words define our time in history. And also these two words define the future. In the digitized and networked world, our behavior, your behavior, and my behavior, whether it's text messaging with your phone, searching something on portal, browsing Amazon for a cool gadget, those behavior will be transformed into a digitized data points. And in the digitized data point, you can easily take information and data from people, from institutions, and even from governments through networks. What happens next is that those who took the data and information will study your behavior, institutions' behavior, and government's behavior, and they'll find a way to influence your behavior, institutions' behavior, and government's behavior. So the technology that could combine digitized data with network will give you huge influence. You could have what's called shaping power, the power to shape people's choices, shape people's way of behave, the power to shape the way the world works. That is enormous power if you think about the magnitude of it. And that is why governments and ICT companies are making huge investments in high technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, quantum computing, and 5G networks, and 6G networks. These essential elements of the future that will give you the power to shape the world and the future. And some uses such power for commercial interests, and some uses it for other interests. And Chinese high-tech companies have expanded their influence in the global market. Perhaps from some people would suggest that they have expanded it too much and too fast. And the US government believes that they have alternate motives other than commercial ones. They are also convinced that Chinese companies and Chinese government is working together. And those companies are Huawei, TikTok, and Seismic, according to US government. These companies have been accused of weaponizing technologies that are essential in the future under the supervision of Chinese government. And these companies are now under serious pressure from the US government. Of course, Chinese government and Chinese companies vehemently refute that accusation, claiming the U.S. government is making groundless accusations. So the battle goes on. Now we have invited a better person to discuss this issue from the United States. Let me introduce Dr. Mark Abdollahian. Hello, Dr. Abdollahian.
Hello, Professor Kim. Thank you, sir.
How are you?
Good, good, good. Greetings from Los Angeles. It's late at night here, so but an early morning for you guys there in Seoul.
Yes, it's around 11:30, so it's almost noon. Before we begin, before I give you the floor, let me introduce you to the audience. Dr. Abdollahian is CEO at ACERTAS, a company provides solutions based on decision intelligence analytics to both public and private sectors. Clients of his firm are from all around the world, including European countries, China, U.S., and South Korea, and some of the international institutions like UN and World Bank. Dr. Abdollahian is a co-founder of Sensia Group Trans Research Consortium. He's also clinical professor at the School of Politics and Economics at Claremont Graduate University. He has appeared on TED Talks multiple times, and his talking points include applications of big data, artificial intelligence, and analytics. Those are just highlights of his bio. We asked Dr. Abdollahian to give a short speech about the Cold War between China and the United States and the implications of that. And after that, we'll further discuss that issue. The floor is yours, Dr. Abdollahian, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Let me extend my gratitude and sincere wishes for continued success to you, Chairman Moon, Mayor Byung, Minister Lee, Chairman Sin, Director Lee, and President Kim, as well as all our colleagues and participants for the 2020 Hankyoreh-Busan International Symposium. I'm actually honored and very grateful to share some of my insights, experience, and advice for our colleagues here in the U.S., in China, and especially in South Korea for policymakers and firms alike. So as you were saying, Professor Kim, I think all of us have been reading the recent headlines of an impending U.S.-China Cold War 2.0. We see it across trade news, finance, market spheres, and these are really symptoms of the recent trends and an underlying shift that many national leaders, business executives, and policymakers face globally today. So events such as the Huawei 5G bans, the recent divestiture of TikTok in the United States, AI and quantum computing competition, and the fight to establish international standards are really dotting the headlines all over the world. They also give us some glimpses into possible alternative futures across the spectrum of whether the US and China will go into a confrontational Cold War? Will it be a competitive environment, or are there areas for them to go back to cooperative and shared prosperity strategies? However, as we all learned from the COVID crisis, if you're a medical doctor, you treat the underlying causes, not the symptoms. So allow me for a few moments to be more of a doctor, more of a scientist, to take us out of our usual frames of reference, debating domestic and foreign policy issues on all sides, with accompanying narratives and interests, to really ask, what are the causes? Let's diagnose and decode what are the undercurrents, the dynamics of why we're seeing what we're seeing in recent US-China tech trends. So here, we're going to focus on an area called geotechnology, or geotech. And it's really the convergence of technology, markets, and politics that's going to define the 21st century. So today, I want to talk about 4 particular areas that I think are relevant for all of us. First, I'll talk a little bit about how the proliferation of technology is really empowering new sources of innovation, disruption, and compressing the timescales that really should force us to recalibrate how we think and evaluate the world around us. Second, I'm going to talk about evolving market dynamics and shifting boundaries that are really defining operational challenges as well as arbitrage opportunities, which are really different from our past old Cold War references and frames and optics, ways of thinking. Third, we know that the international order is changing, different spheres of influence throughout the world, and domestic political agendas are fundamentally changing as a result of this convergence. Finally, given that we can diagnose some of these underlying dynamics, I think the best way to approach it is looking at it with 4 key pillars of strategy that's going to help any policymaker or firm kind of navigate this. So first, let's start with technology. As we all know, the world's in multiple technological revolutions. These span the massive amounts of data we're seeing, advances in machine learning, AI, and we have smart everythings for consumers and citizens alike. Technology is not the problem. It's helping define the problem. So technology is an enabler. And there's really several key developments that we should be aware of so that we can think a little bit differently now. First, most of you probably know there's more computing power in our smartphones than all of NASA had in 1969 to send a man to the moon. That computational power grows quickly. Well, 60% of the world's population is connected with the internet, and 3.5 billion people on this planet have smartphones. So the proliferation of technology access has real implications for individuals, our lives, civil society, social media, and information wars that we're seeing every day. Another really interesting aspect of technology is the Internet of Things. Today, there's over 26 billion devices connected to the internet. Each thing is either an input sensor or an output control. What does that allow us to do? Create much more complex and useful systems like autonomous vehicles and smart cities. But it also creates opportunities for complex behavior, which can be nefarious, like cybersecurity threats. Of course, more data has been generated in the last few years than all of human history combined. So that data can help combat COVID, for example. Also that data can be used for more nefarious purposes. So fundamentally, technology is changing how we as individuals live, how firms make money, whether here in the US and China and Korea or in Europe, how economies operate, and how nations govern. So the last part is this technology advancement is happening faster and faster than we can realize. It took 8,000 years of human progress for us to go from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution. It only took 9 years from the commercialization of the internet to the sequencing of the entire human genome in the early 2000s. Sequencing the human genome was a coordinated whole of global industry and government approach. It was accomplished in almost under 15 years and cost $10 billion. Today, this can be formed in a single lab almost anywhere in the world in less than 3 days for a cost of $100,000 or $1,000, excuse me. So technology, 5G, IoT, AI teaches us that we cannot move ahead with the same lenses, and the same linear extrapolations of the past is going to be a lot like the future, because there are tipping points and accelerating timescales. So giving these tipping points, accelerating timescales, the decreasing cost of technology, we're witnessing new market dynamics, different profitable multiplier effects across different sectors, new players and participants challenging established market leaders. So this is where we start getting into the alleged US-China Cold War technology 2.0. So look back and see the American growth miracle in the 20th century was based in a large part to investment in basic research that produced new technologies that had tremendous multiplier effects across multiple sectors in the economy. This investment and this first mover advantage created tremendous amount of growth for the United States. However, today, with the proliferation of technology and new sources, innovation can come from multiple places in the world. So we see a lot of leapfrogging or surpassing old dominant firms, which is really going to be the name of the game moving ahead. So in the contemporary US-China context, up until a few years ago, major US, European, Korean, and other firms in the higher end of the market and upstream and supply chains worked with Chinese companies in the downstream. It was a very stable, mutually beneficial arrangement that was quite profitable and made a lot of people happy. As a result of all of our success on both sides of the world, increasing economic complexity emerged, increasing connectivity, globalization. Trade's gone up in the last 30 years from $3 trillion to $19 trillion as of last year. China's moved from a low-cost, low-tech producer up the value chain. And it's natural for them to compete with US, China, or with US, Korea, and other technology players. This is really due to a few reasons. First, the determinants of economic growth from a developed versus developing country perspective. And second, China's recent focus on long-term basic as well as applied research. While the US focus lately has been on applied research, which can be commercialized very quickly within 2-3 years for a return on investment. So much of the geotech competition today is looking at how US, how China, as well as Korea and the Europeans, et cetera, are really going to balance their basic versus applied research portfolios in terms of when they want their return on the investment. It's also about shaping, creating, and owning the infrastructure or the platform. Professor Kim, you were saying new sources of power given technology, because controlling access to the platform where most economic activity and transactions will happen, many people are saying is one of the keys to 21st century power. So we're seeing the competition between US and China technology and 5G, setting the rules, the standards, the infrastructure, et cetera, which brings us to the third area of geotech convergence, politics. Back in 2000, I wrote a book with several colleagues called Power Transitions, where we were anticipating China's economic rise on the global stage. It was not very popular amongst my US colleagues at the time, but it's nice to look back and say we were right. But we all have known for a long time the trajectories of geoeconomics. It's a simple, tried but true formula of growth as a function of economic productivity, demographics, and a government's political capacity. So the exact same dynamics that propelled France, the UK, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and the US to preeminence on the global stage is propelling China and India today. So for the US to maintain its global preeminence, GDP per capita productivity would need to be at least 4 times greater than China's, given the huge differential in US-China market sizes and population sizes. Doing this is going to be a very difficult challenge, especially given the proliferation of technology and new economic dynamics. So we want to step back and we want to look at US and China and how they're likely to act, react, and interact through the lens of either they can focus on conflict, competition, or cooperation. So we really look at their strategies across the spectrum. Conflict is really the struggle between beliefs and interests, et cetera. That's where you have a lot of unilateral strategies to maximize absolute private gains. Recent US policy has often been characterized as transactionalism, where it is unilateral. Competition, which lies in the middle, implies some degree of common goals, interests, agree to work in a framework, but you compete. And with that strategic competition, you drive relative efficiencies in a marketplace. And often there's a rising tide for all in that. On the other side of the spectrum, you have cooperation. Cooperation is we agree on the rules, the norms, the institutions, et cetera, where we can come together and create synergistic value that we couldn't create by ourselves. So it's really where the sum is greater than the parts. So here you have multilateral cooperation to secure some synergistic public goods, which are otherwise unachievable. I think the COVID vaccination and the cooperation globally to try to find such a vaccination is a great example of sort of this multilateral cooperation. So while 5G, AI, IoT are the new technology races for global power, how the US and China will engage across this spectrum is really going to depend on markets, technologies, and interests. While the Trump administration tended to focus on the conflict competition side in trade and technology, as we all seen, a new incoming Biden administration is going to tilt a little bit more towards the competition and cooperation side of the spectrum in key areas. Why? Well, economic growth is every politician's key buzzword, as hope for a better tomorrow always secures political survival today. Yes, of course, there's going to be competition, economic competition, security issues to address. But if the supply of economic gains and the upside from economic competition and cooperation is greater than the domestic demand for political security on either side, then a geotech Cold War is not an inevitability, nor is it beneficial. However, and so here we have one alternative future, which is moving back towards more multilateralism or regionalism with different economic spheres of influence and security interests once basic security has been achieved on either side. Conversely, if the supply of economic upside from competition cooperation is less than the domestic demand for political security, then we're going to continue the recent trends towards decoupling, bifurcation, and unilateralism that we're all seeing in the international political order. Which brings us to the final point, and this is strategy. So we've diagnosed this, now what can we do about it? So many policymakers and business leaders around the world are already struggling with this contest. And it's often cast in terms of, on one side, we have the US as our main security ally, and on the other side, we have China as the top trading partner. For South Korea, for example, China's the largest trading partner. Both imports and exports are around 24-25% on average per year, while imports and exports for the US, for South Korea is about 15% on average. So many experts are calling for this wait and see approach. Engage and hedge strategy to see which way the trend of US economic growth versus political security issues balance out with China. Some experts even say that it's not possible for them to play a role as a third force balancing between the two powers. However, this simply is not the case. Whatever trajectory the US-China competition takes in the 21st century is also dependent on the global, regional, and national context, decisions, firms, markets, and technological innovations of all of us. So I really do not subscribe to this deterministic view of we're heading towards really bad outcomes. So what I've been doing for many years is trying to understand all these dynamics, more of a doctor, more of a scientist, and then turn that back into how do we formulate robust and adaptive strategies using information, data, and analytics to help shape national policy, to help decode the trends and help us successfully navigate it. So standing where we are today, my advice to successfully navigate and understand the geotech competition, there's really 4 key strategic pillars. First, secure core high priority defensive strategies, which really balance economic revenues and political security. And this is going to happen in key economic sectors with firms that are creating technology that has both a short-term return on investment and long-term return on investment. that really creates value in technology ecosystems. Second, strategy designed specifically to deal with different contingencies of if increasing multilateralism trends emerge or continued decoupling of markets. So you need to be able to say when those scenarios or those alternative futures materialize, we're ready and we're prepared. Third, while less optimal, you probably also want to pursue or at least identify some hedging strategies across these different alternative futures. Hedging strategies, just like in the financial markets, as well as in national policy, really diversify opportunity shocks and lower risk. And finally, investment in long-term shaping strategies. These long-term shaping strategies is rebalancing our applied versus basic research and development portfolios in technology. It's addressing market standards. Currently, we're seeing the debate between US and China on 5G spectrums and which end of the spectrum we should operate based upon their individual advantages. And finally, for firms as well as policymakers, we need to become much more agile organizations to capture opportunities faster than competitors. So now that we've taken a few minutes, we've stepped out of our interests, we stepped out of our narratives, hopefully we can understand the undercurrents at the convergence of technology, markets, and politics. As a doctor, as a scientist, now let's step back in, let's become the strategists, let's step back into the interests, our responsibilities and goals. So we all need to be more proactive. We need to capture upside opportunities in new emerging normals instead of chasing downside losses and eroding status quo. We cannot move ahead with the same lenses, frameworks, and optics we had in the last Cold War. That's not going to get us through the 21st century. So the future is our choice. It's not destined to be a US-China Cold War, but it will vary across the conflict, competition, and cooperation spectrum. It's going to vary by markets. It's going to vary by engagement points. It's going to vary by industries, nations, and individuals. Ultimately, though, it's still our choice to create the future we desire, and it's also our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdollahian. That was wonderful thoughts, and you touched on a wide spectrum of issues. And I would like to break down those issues, but before we do that, I want to give audience a chance to get to know you better. Obviously, you are one of the leading experts in your field. That's why you are invited to talk to us today. But not everyone here is from your field. So could you tell us about what you do and what your firm does? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. I've been blessed and fortunate, I think, for many years to take a lot of the things we learn in economics and politics and engineering, et cetera, and pull them together to create products, tools, solutions, and services. So we've been fusing strategy with AI, data, and analytics for many years. So the new term now, it's no different than what we've been doing for many years, is decision intelligence. It's just, the markets came up with a new term, which everyone likes. And that is how you combine strategy with evidence, with data, and with AI. So what we've been doing is solving high-risk, mission-critical challenges across the public and private sectors for many years, using data, using analytics, using AI. Several US and foreign governments are clients and partners, including Korea. And most of them rely on our technologies to better navigate the political uncertainty, policy, or business outcomes that they would like to achieve. So we have several platforms. Centurion is one that's been verified and validated by the US military intelligence and diplomatic communities. It's been operational for many, many years. In April, during the COVID crisis, we actually, as a free public service, we felt compelled as it was the entire team, to launch an online platform called One. It maps and tracks U.S. Political, economic, social reactions to the pandemic in near real time, just to give people a sense of greater situational awareness and what's going on from a very human perspective. Some of this technology comes from our other big data and AI early warning platforms that we also deploy. So that's kind of where I come from and kind of the world I'm in.
Thank you. Let's talk about some of the issues you raised in your speech. In order to get the sense of what's going on in the United States, I want to start by asking you about the changes and continuity of the U.S. domestic politics, geographic, nature. Obviously, the election was held last week, and technically it's not over yet. And one side is not willing to concede because of the obvious reason. And another reason why I want to ask you about the election and U.S. politics is that you're a natural-born U.S. citizen, so you're naturally qualified to talk about U.S. politics. So this year's election is by far the most controversial election, even before it began. And it still is very controversial. And a few days ago, Joe Biden made a speech, and in his speech, he mentioned about uniting the nation and healing the nation. And that suggests to me that the country is most seriously divided in the history of the United States. And the confrontation within the domestic political geography is more than concerning. And that has to affect the incoming administration's policy stance and policy priorities. What is your take on this issue?
Well, I think, Professor Kim, you said it in your opening remarks. Technology has played a fundamentally different role in this election than it has in the past. Over the last few years, social media has become a new platform which creates echo chambers for particular groups with beliefs and interests on all sides. Being an American, I can only imagine what the view was looking into the U.S., looking at all the social media posts going around from election zealots on all sides. Technology did play a huge role, but the election will be contested for a little while. We're going to hear, the various legal challenges. Will there be merits or not? That's up to the courts. But regardless, most Americans expect a transition in January. But you ask a very important question about U.S. political geography. And it's unfortunate that most people looking at that map for like a week, and all you saw were red and blue states, which is actually very misleading. In fact, if you zoom into the map and instead of looking at the state level, you look at the county level, and then we're not just going to look at it as a blue or red, but we're going to look at the percentage blue Democrat or the percentage red Republican. You're really going to see a real blurring of purple, as most Americans are centrist. And so social media, especially in this election, has really driven the extremes on both sides, when most Americans aren't like that. So one of the most striking outcomes for this election compared to 2016 is the swing to a more democratic candidates in almost all major urban areas nationwide. So in a lot of ways, the current division, it's not really Republican or Democrat, but urban versus rural, with different lifestyles, values, beliefs, and with very different economic and opportunities and challenges as such. So born and raised here, actually growing up in Ohio, it was difficult to see the economic value or understand the economic value of a global supply chain when there's factories closing. Living in Los Angeles today, it's difficult not to see the opportunities that geotechnology presents us. So the next US administration is not just to unite Americans socially and politically, but unite them economically across these different fronts.
Thank you. Let's talk about the ICT industry, current status of ICT industries in China and the United States. Since we've been talking about the U.S. side, let's talk about the Chinese side and Chinese industry status. As you and I know, Chinese are known for long-term strategic planning, and President Xi has announced several long-term plans, including Made in China 2025. Also, they have been working on a plan called China Standard 2035. They've been working on this for about 2.5 years. And the rumor has it that they are about to complete the strategy, and they will announce that strategy soon. And it's about ICT industrial strategy. As an expert on this issue, how much do you know about China's ICT industrial strategy, and what impact would that make in the global market, and especially on the U.S.-China technological confrontations?
Excellent question. Although I'm not a specific expert in this field, we have done some work in the area. So exactly as you said, Professor Kim, China has a very different long-term policy goals and a longer-term policy horizon than the U.S. So whether it's the Made in China 2025 or the 2035, it's all about investing in technology and standards that can be useful globally. So, and the way they do it, and you hear whether in Washington, Europe, or in Seoul, of a lot of state-owned enterprises and government interference. But conversely, if you look at it from the other side, in the United States, we still have tax incentives. We still have grants and funds for particular developments in particular markets for various firms here. So what China will be doing is not only developing the standards and the technology internationally, and their international strategy is going to be low cost. It's going to be using third parties as access to markets, which is not right or wrong. It's just their strategy to go to global markets. And by doing that, they'll be able to roll out technology standards at a lower cost. Whereas in the US, unless we can compete at scale and at cost, we're just going to have to offer a very different product. And so just like any product in the marketplace, you always have the trade-off between highest quality, lowest price, and kind of good customer service and support. So I think that's where it's going. You're going to see a lot of Chinese M&A activity, cross-border investment through JVs, and that's going to continue. And that'll continue not just in 5G, but you're going to see it in biomedical research. You're going to see it in digital currencies. And you're going to start to see it in a lot of areas of the digital economy of the 21st century.
So Chinese government is planning to specifically select a certain certain section of the ICT industry and strengthen their marketability and their competitibility in the global market. That's basically the idea of China Standard 2035. Then that makes me wonder if Biden administration would be able to compete with China's strategy, because I've been closely watching Biden's policy promises, and one that particularly stands out that might be connected to ICT industry policy of Biden administration is his Made in All of America policy. is still in general terms, but it could be relevant to the U.S. ICT industry. What is your take on his Made in All of America policy?
Wonderful question. So remember when we were talking about the incoming administration, not only do they need to politically unify Americans and socially, but economically. So that goes to transforming our economy from a 20th century manufacturing, high labor input base in declining and sunset industries to the new 21st century economy in terms of high tech, in terms of services, in terms of knowledge. So that's going to be the first transition we'll need to do. Given that, then Made in America doesn't present a problem for anyone. It only presents opportunities, because what we'll do and what we've always continued to do is to compete in the areas and the technology where we're best, where it makes economic sense. So, we will see reshoring of a lot of jobs. However, the economics, the finance from firm perspective isn't going to make sense to invest a lot of money for a low product, low cost, low value add in any value chain. So I think there's 2 steps to that process, and granted, they're not going to be easy, but that's going to be the key for the incoming administration, as well as the U.S. ICT technology sector, to be viable going ahead in the future.
Well, speaking about the ICT industry strategy, for the last 4 years, we hear a lot and we saw a lot about governmental action from the U.S. side on Chinese firms and Chinese government policies and strategies. But what we have not heard enough, or we have not seen enough, is the strategy from the U.S. American ICT industry itself. Is there any movement in this critical transition time for them to develop more capability to compete with Chinese firms and Chinese strategies? Do you know any of their policy agendas and any of their strategies?
And there's a huge opportunity right now. And so that goes not just for the ICT industry, but American businesses. And you could look at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who've done wonderful work in this area. So let's just look at ICT. Let's look at 5G, right? In the administration the last 4 years with the Huawei ban, it's really been a focus on US or Ericsson or Nokia infrastructure and setting standards and all the rules. Under the Biden administration, I think that's still going to stay. It's not going to be a Scorbic, but the U.S. West, Samsung has a wonderful opportunity to come and fulfill the needs of critical infrastructure here in the U.S. I think they just signed a $6.6 billion agreement with Verizon recently. Critical infrastructure will be U.S.-led. Secondary infrastructure is going to be market-driven. That also goes for the internet, and the trends from decoupling we had before with multiple internets to I think the incoming administration is going to try to reverse those trends, but as long as they ensure national resiliency. And you can say the same thing for AI, quantum, chips, materials research, et cetera. So there is a huge opportunity right now in that space for those sectors with the incoming administration.
Thank you. As you mentioned earlier, the confrontation between China and United States, some suggest that presents opportunities for businesses like Samsung or LG, like Korean ICT industry. But also there's an opinion that suggests that it may look like an opportunity for the short term, but in the long term, if the confrontation and conflict continues between these two superpowers, it will bring down the global economy, and the opportunity in and of itself will be shrinking. What is your take on that? And what kind of opportunity that companies like Samsung and LG should seize in this transition period?
So that's why I was talking earlier about those 4 key pillars in any strategy. One are the core defensive moves. 2 is planning for the contingencies of a decoupling versus a return to multilateralism. And 3 is really a hedging strategy of how do I de-risk my investment, my operations portfolio. And in a lot of ways, what people are doing are multilateral pooling of that risk in terms of joint ventures. So as I was saying, Samsung, SK, and other Korean ICT firms, they really have a unique opportunity in this marketplace between Huawei and low-cost China and US and high-cost European providers. So they really can provide cost-effective 5G architecture, networks, and infrastructure without any real or perceived security threats. That's going to do quite well when in areas or countries or markets that aren't looking for the lowest price or the highest, conversely. So what that does is it presents an opportunity in developing and in emerging market economies with, as I say, local JVs, cross-border M&A activities to really help local economic growth, firm revenues, and growth opportunities. So think about it. The Korean footprint is already global, and that was built a lot on durable consumer goods and electronics. So the footprint is there, the access to markets is there. Now is the time to begin to leverage that access to markets into the 21st century economy. And so that's data, AI, and ICT. So the new economy, remember, it's not about transactions and products, but it's about providing the platform and the ecosystem about how all those goods and services are interrelated. So those opportunities are across the US, they're across Africa, Europe, Asia, as well as Latin America, I think.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I have to ask you final thoughts on this issue. And also, we are here gathered in the city of Busan, the city probably you have visited. So any suggestions for, Busan is the epicenter of South Korean economy, so any business suggestions for the good people of Busan?
So besides being a sister city of Los Angeles where I live, and besides also enjoying wonderful Busan crabs on the beach there, I think Busan has unique opportunities to continue its maritime and ICT presence across East Asia and really leverage the dynamic business. And it's become a epicenter, as you were saying, for culture and arts opportunities. So similar to the Dubai miracle, of focused investment based upon recurring revenue streams and strong business outcomes, and really diversification of those into different economic sectors is only going to continue the city's successful economic transformation for the future. So many areas such as maritime transportation verticals can be integrated with new global demands for cleaner, more efficient transportation needs and technology, creating a cultural center, a thriving hub for business, as well as symposiums such as we're doing today.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time to share your thoughts and experience with us today. That's it for the second session, and I wish we could spend more time, but perhaps next time. Before I go, I want to thank the people who put in a lot of effort to make this event happen. I want to thank Director Lee Yong-in and other staff members, and I want to especially thank Chairman Moon Jung-in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Despite the time difference, Dr. Abdollahian has connected with us from Los Angeles, Busan's sister city. A big round of applause to both Dr. Abdollahian and Dr. Kim. Thank you very much. With this, we would like to conclude the morning session and move on to luncheon. Let me make a couple announcements.